Helping family financially rarely starts as obligation. It usually starts with one situation you know you can fix: a bill, a crisis, a gap you can close. So you step in, and nothing changes at first. But after that moment, something begins reorganizing quietly. The person who helped becomes the person who can help, and the person who can help becomes the person expected to help. This is usually when people notice something uncomfortable. Help stops being something you do. It becomes something people assume. Financial help inside families rarely turns into obligation because someone demands it. It usually happens because systems adapt. The first time you help, it solves a problem. The second time, it reduces risk. By the third time, something invisible begins forming. Stability starts attaching to you, not because you asked for that role, because you proved you could carry it. Families naturally reorganize around the person who reduces uncertainty. The one who can close gaps becomes the one people look toward when gaps appear. At first, this feels reasonable. You helped because you could. But what most people do not notice is what changes after that. The family system begins calculating around you, not consciously, structurally. Who has margin? Who can absorb pressure? Who can prevent collapse? And slowly, something subtle happens. You stop being just a helpful person. You become part of how the family manages risk. This is the quiet transition most people never see happening. Help turns into reliability, reliability turns into expectation, and expectation quietly turns into position. What makes this difficult to notice is how normal it feels while it is happening. No meeting happens, no agreement is made, nobody announces the change. The system simply remembers who reduced pressure last time. And when pressure appears again, the system moves toward the same solution. This is not about fairness, it's about predictability. Families learn where stability exists, and once stability is located, uncertainty naturally begins moving toward it. This is why many helpers slowly realize something uncomfortable. They did not just help solve a problem, they became part of the solution structure. And structures are much harder to step away from than single acts of generosity. The shift from generosity to obligation rarely happens through conversation. It happens through repetition. The more times someone helps, the less surprising it becomes. What was once appreciated becomes normal. What was once relief becomes part of how problems get solved. This is how expectation forms without anyone intending it. The person who helped becomes the person who usually helps, and usually slowly turns into always. Families do not always mean to create this pressure. Most of the time, they're just responding to patterns. If one person consistently steps in, others begin adjusting their behavior around that stability. They delay solutions, they wait longer, they take slightly more risk. Not because they are irresponsible, because stability nearby makes risk feel safer. This is how financial help quietly changes behavior around you. Your reliability becomes part of other people's decision-making. Over time, something even more subtle happens. People stop asking whether you can help, they begin assuming you probably will, not out of entitlement, out of familiarity. This is where expectation becomes invisible. It is no longer about whether help is possible, it becomes part of how problems get solved. This is why many helpers begin noticing something difficult to explain. They are not asked more aggressively, they are simply included more automatically. Their stability becomes part of the background structure everyone depends on. And this is where the pressure begins increasing without anyone saying a word. Because once people begin factoring you into how problems get solved, stepping back no longer feels neutral. It feels like removing part of the structure they started depending on. At some point, the person helping begins noticing something difficult to explain. The help is still voluntary, but it no longer feels optional. Saying yes feels normal. Saying no starts feeling uncomfortable. Not because someone is forcing them, because identity begins attaching to the role. The reliable one, the helper, the one who figures things out. This is where many people start experiencing quiet pressure they can't easily describe. The pressure doesn't come from the money itself, it comes from what happens if they stop. If helping becomes part of how the family stays stable, stepping back can start feeling like causing instability, even when it's reasonable, even when it's necessary. This creates a quiet internal calculation, not just can I help, but what happens if I don't. Many helpers begin measuring consequences before making decisions. Will someone struggle? Will things fall apart? Will relationships change? This is where generosity begins turning into psychological responsibility, not because someone assigned it, because removing support begins to feel like causing harm. This is where the role becomes heavy. The helper is no longer just making financial decisions, they are managing emotional consequences. And this is where many financially stable people begin feeling trapped in a role they never consciously accepted. The person who keeps things from falling apart, the person who absorbs instability before it spreads. And this is the quiet cost most people never talk about. The more reliable you become, the harder it becomes to show weakness. The more problems you solve, the less room you are given to struggle yourself. Stability begins protecting others, but it can also begin isolating the person providing it. This is where many helpers begin facing a conflict they rarely talk about. Not a financial conflict, an identity conflict. Helping feels right, but always helping begins to feel heavy. The same stability that allowed generosity begins creating obligation, and slowly a difficult question begins forming. Am I helping because I want to, or because this is who I became? This question is uncomfortable because loyalty is involved. Families are built on support, and people who can help often want to help. But over time, something changes. The choice becomes less about generosity and more about maintaining a role. The reliable one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't let things fall apart. This is where saying no starts feeling like breaking something bigger than a single request. It can feel like breaking trust, breaking expectations, breaking the image people have of you. Not because anyone says this directly, because identity begins tying you to the position. And this is where many financially stable people feel pressure from two directions. One direction says protect your stability, protect your future, protect what you built. The other direction says do not abandon the people you depended on. This is where obligation quietly forms, not from requests, from identity loyalty. Dependence inside families rarely forms through large moments. It forms through small, repeated adjustments. Who gets called first when something unexpected happens? Who gets asked for advice before decisions are made? Who receives the message when someone runs out of options? These patterns usually form quietly. Nobody assigns the role. It forms because the same person keeps reducing pressure. Over time, this creates something structural. The helper becomes part of how the family manages uncertainty. Not always through giving money directly, sometimes through being available, through offering guidance, through providing stability others can lean on. This is how dependence grows without anyone planning it. Money reinforces this pattern because financial stability signals capacity. The person with margin is seen as the person with options, and the person with options becomes the person others turn toward when they run out of their own. This is not about exploitation, it's about how systems manage risk. Families naturally move pressure to the place where collapse seems least likely, and stability makes collapse seem less likely. This is why many helpers begin noticing something subtle over time. Their help is no longer just assistance, it becomes part of how the family absorbs shocks. Another quiet mechanism appears here. Once someone becomes known as the person who can help, others begin adjusting before even asking. They may save less, delay decisions longer, wait to see if help becomes available. Not always consciously, but behavior shifts around perceived safety. Stability nearby makes risk feel smaller, and this is where many helpers begin feeling something difficult to describe. Their stability is no longer just protecting their own life, it's influencing how others manage theirs. This is the point where generosity has fully turned into structure. And structures are difficult to step away from because other decisions have started forming around them. Once someone becomes the reliable financial helper, something else begins changing quietly. Their own behavior starts adjusting, not because they want to change, because more now depends on their stability. Decisions that once felt personal start feeling structural. Risks feel heavier, spending feels more calculated, even career choices can begin feeling different. Not because ambition disappeared, because instability now feels like it could affect more than just one life. This is where financial responsibility can slowly begin reducing personal flexibility. Many helpers begin noticing they hesitate more, not just about helping others, about their own moves. Should I change jobs? Should I take this risk? Should I make this big decision? The question is no longer just, what do I want? It quietly becomes, who